Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. So today we are going to be drawing some more chibi expression sets for my OCs, similar to how I did these two videos. But this time, instead of making them random, I thought it'd be nice to get a good standard set of expressions for all of my OCs first. We are going to be working in Clip Studio Paint today, but on the iPad. So if you are unfamiliar with Clip Studio Paint, it is a program that many artists use to create their digital creations, such as illustrations, comics, and even 2D animations. You can try out trial versions of the program both on the PC or on mobile devices. So this can actually be your phone or your tablet or an iPad. And if you really like the program, then you can go ahead and get it after you try out the trial version. Immediately, one thing I love about Clip Studio Paint is that it actually allows you to work on the same file via their file transfer through their cloud system. So I actually have a template that I've made previously on the desktop version, and now I have access to the exact file now on my iPad. So now it's easier for me to transfer and work on the same project. This is extremely helpful if you plan to do traveling or you're going to be away from your desktop for a long period of time. You can definitely work from one file on your desktop, switch it over to your iPad or your mobile version, and continue to work on it as if you were at your desktop. Now with the template all ready, let's go ahead and start off with the sketching portion. So the cool thing about using Clip Studio Paint on the mobile version is that you have the opportunity to switch over to their simple mode, but simple mode is not available on the PC version. This is just exclusively on the mobile versions. Simple mode has a more kind of like minimalistic interface compared to the default studio version that you're probably more used to seeing, but it still has a lot of tools at your disposal to work on any of your illustrations, comic work, all of that. So Clip Studio Paint in general has a very vast selection of like tools and assets and materials on their website for you to download. So you can import your favorite brushes into simple mode and have access to all the brushes that you use the most all in one place. So for the sketches, I have selected 6 different emotions for the 6 of my OCs. So we will be doing about 36 little chibis. The top row, which I will call it kind of like their neutral faces, and then the remaining 5 will be happy, sad, angry, shy, and shocked. I will kind of like deviate slightly as I think my OCs will express certain emotions a little bit differently from one another, but also because I want to use these as like emojis or like stickers in the future, I do want them to be different enough so that they don't look all the same when they're all together. So while I'm doing the sketching, I actually put down a background color prior, and it's kind of like behind the grid so that it makes it a little bit easier for me to see my own sketch. But also we will be taking it, I guess, like off as soon as we start to do the line art and the coloring, because I do want all these little chibis to be transparent in terms of like being in their own space rather than being confined into these grids and boxes. So kind of moving along with our sketching portion finished, let's go ahead and work on the next step, which happens to be line art. I find sketching super fun and relaxing, so I wanted to do that mostly in simple mode. But for the line art and coloring portion, I want to treat it the same way as I do on the PC version. So let's go ahead and switch on over to the studio mode here. Also, just a reminder, always remember to save your work often. But studio mode has all of like Clip's features available to you. So while I'm working, I will be slowly arranging and changing the layout to kind of match my workflow. So for the line art, I am using one of their default brushes called the Milli Pen. It has little to no line weight variation, so I find it very perfect for these kind of chibis as I kind of want them to be easily read with simple line art. So I set the brush size and arrange my layers exactly the same way on the PC version. So sometimes when I'm working, I either prioritize having my windows a little bit closer to my working hand, or I prioritize the space. So sometimes you might see me pop out my layers window when I'm working on the line art. Sometimes I put it back into where the rest of my menus are so that I can prioritize the space a little bit more. It just depends a little bit on the workflow or how I'm feeling. Sometimes I want it to be a little bit closer for me to have easier access. So for the actual arrangement of my layers, I do keep my line art separate into 3 different layers. So I have one for the, I guess like accessories. In this case, it's just Akemi's glasses. 2, I do have the eyes on a separate layer. And then the third layer that I have underneath is actually just like every other line art that I actually have to do. It also makes it easier for me to be able to color the line art later so I don't have any weird overlap. So I keep the eyes on a separate layer as well as Akemi's glasses. Then I set I believe the eye layer to be red so that I can have a easier way of keeping track of what layer is what when I'm working quickly, and it's just easier to identify this way. Line art tends to take me a long time, so I won't bore you with all of this footage, so let's go ahead and skip on ahead a little bit. But before we start with the coloring, I like to add a darker border around the chibis to give it kind of like a thicker look on the outside, and I also use this tool to help me fill in the flat gray colors as the base. So the little ice cream looking icon, I just basically select around my entirety of my line arts and it kind of fills in everything automatically, which is great. I will then clip a folder to this layer so that I can keep all my colors contained to this gray little flat area, as it will kind of act as my base. Also, let's go ahead and import my old set of kind of like chibis from my desktop over to my iPad so that I can make the color palette here, and it'll make coloring a lot quicker and a little bit more accurate. So the great thing about Clip Studio Paint is actually the customizability, in my opinion. It's just freaking fantastic. When I switched over to Clip, I think like a couple of years ago, I made my layout resemble the other art programs that I was more used to because I noticed that I still stuck to a lot of my old habits. It just helped to reduce the amount of times I spent looking for certain tools, or if I have habits with certain windows being in a certain place, then you can make your own layout to resemble that old program. And then you can also save it to kind of like different layouts and different workspaces, and you can always change it whenever you need to, which I really love. I also love that a lot of the windows are able to be like popped out and like shoved to a different place. It just makes it easier for you to customize it truly to your own workspace. So kind of talking a little bit about making your workflow a little bit more efficient or making it a little bit faster. While I'm coloring, you can kind of see that my left hand is holding my phone off screen every so often, and it's actually because I have Clip Studio Paint on my phone as well, and I actually have it connected to my iPad via its companion mode, and I won't talk about it too much here. I might talk about it in a different video, but it's kind of like having a shortcut remote in your hand, but it has a lot more options than just like random shortcut keys. But let's talk a little bit about the coloring first. So I opted to do the skin tone and basic shading for all of them first, as the rest of the coloring will kind of cover up a lot of my messier areas. I'm using the airbrush for mostly just the blush areas for all my characters, and then I use a softer brush to do like little blush lines. But everything else, like the flats, shading, highlights, will be done with the G pen because it has a little bit more of that crisp edge that I really like. So for kind of the sake of time, I will be picking a select few of my favorite ones of the chibis that I drew and showing you guys actually how I color them. So for shading, I set the layer to multiply and add a light muted purple. And then for the highlights, I kind of do the opposite by adding in another layer with screen and set the color to be more of like a mid-tone yellow. So after I finished coloring in the majority of the skin, for the eyes, I ended up doing basically all the characters' eyes all at once, which happens to be just me alpha locking our eye line art layer and then kind of blocking in our colors. Then after that, we move on to hair and clothing. So for the hair and clothing, they will be kind of filled in on the same layer to make the multiply and screen layer easier for me to use on the entirety of the chibi rather than on only certain parts. So this way, if I split the hair and the clothing on its separate layers, most likely I will have to make a multiply and screen layer on each individual one. So that might be like my base, multiply screen, and then another base, multiply and screen. But if I merge my bases together, I can just use the same like shading and highlight color for everything, which makes things a little bit easier and faster for myself. Also, it just makes things look a little bit more consistent in my opinion. A little detail that I like to do in the hair area for all of my OCs is that I tend to take the multiply color that I end up putting on the hair and then taking that to the same line art layer that I had done initially and coloring in the areas that are a little bit lighter. I think it just makes everything look a little bit more softer, but also just less jarring because I don't really want black lines throughout the entirety of the chibi. And I think the hair has like the most contrast with the shading color and the base color because I just do like one swoop of a curve to indicate a little bit of like the curvature of the head instead of actually doing individual little shading like parts for each strands of the hair to be indicated, I guess. So a lot of the things that I talk about for certain steps of when I'm doing these little chibi emotes or whatever you want to call them, expressions, you can definitely do them in simple mode as well, but there are slight changes or like small features that you're not going to be able to do strictly in the simple mode, so you would have to switch over to studio mode like I did, but I don't really see that as an issue because with how easy it is to switch from simple mode to studio mode or vice versa where you can switch from studio mode to simple mode, I definitely think you can't really get stuck, so it's not really of an issue. I think it's just like one is more comfortable than the other depending on your own workflow, or maybe sometimes you feel like the menus are a little bit overwhelming and you don't want to go through with like making a workspace that's a little bit more minimalistic. You can definitely go to simple mode and it'll just kind of like free up some more space on your iPad, because I do have a smaller iPad or like a screen compared to some other people, so you might want more drawing real estate, which I think simple mode is probably more preferable in that case. Well, if you want to do more like your typical stuff that maybe you do on desktop, you can definitely do it in studio mode on the iPad as well, and there's not really any difference. So now we are nearing the end of all the coloring. There are a few things that I'm missing, so I am going to be making a new layer on top of everything and setting this layer to have the outline feature on, which is one of my favorite features. This feature is just makes everything easier when it comes to having an outline around shapes, or if you want to outline text or anything like that, like handwritten text, it just automatically puts a border or an outline around it. So I'm going to be using these to add in little effects over my chibis and making them a little bit extra cute, and I will change the colors to match them a little bit more appropriately afterwards. I'm just going to alpha lock our shapes and then we can color on top, and I've set my border for the outline feature to be black to kind of match the other elements around like the thickness of the chibi's lines, as well as just like the black lines overall. Sometimes when I'm doing the line art, I'll actually add all these little, I don't know what you want to call them, little details on top as I'm doing the line art. But because I wanted to kind of quicken my workflow, I thought it'd be easier for me to use the outline feature to add everything afterwards. Or I could do kind of like the opposite and put like anything behind the chibis. I just have to be a little bit wary of where I'm putting that kind of like dark, thick outline around every chibi. And hopefully it doesn't impede with what I want to do with certain effects. So kind of with all of those done, I am going to be switching back to simple mode just very briefly to show you one last thing, is that the simple mode actually has a new filter function. So if you want to ever edit your photos or your illustrations just to give it a little bit more oomph, or if you have like a specific effect that you're looking for, so you have like a bunch of filters from like warm, cool, I believe there's some other ones that are a little bit more like temperature specific, as some more kind of like fun ones as well, and it also has sepia and I think monochrome. So if you're ever interested in checking out Clip Studio Paint, definitely check out any of the links in the description. I will make sure to add them all there alongside with any of the brushes that I typically use for both Clip Studio Paint or the ones that I've used today specifically in today's video. I've gotten a few requests for me to make some custom brushes, so I'm going to experiment a little bit more to see if I can get some similar to other ones that I use more for like painting illustrations and stuff, and then I'll let you guys know what those brushes will be and have access for that for you guys in the future. Thank you again to Clip Studio Paint for sponsoring today's video. Make sure to check them out, even if it's just for the trial version. I think it's a wonderful experience to draw in Clip Studio Paint or just do like illustration, comics, even animation and all that, so definitely check them out. And with that being said, I will talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!